For years they slept in separate rooms, and no one at Ashford Manor ever spoke of it out loud. The house stood against the cold winter, like it was holding its breath. Snow clung to the stone walls, and weak daylight slipped through tall windows that had not seen warmth between two hearts for nearly 7 long years. It was 1878, and silence ruled the manor with quiet power. Elone, Duchess of Ashford, stood by the window in her sitting room, watching pale light crawl across the frozen land. Her gloved fingers rested on a porcelain teacup that had gone cold. She did not drink it. She rarely did. She was waiting, though she no longer knew for what. Waiting had become her life. She waited every morning when she woke alone. She waited through afternoons as servants passed her door with careful eyes. She waited every night when she heard his footsteps in the hall, holding her breath until they moved past her room and faded toward his distant chambers. At 32, she felt like a ghost inside her own marriage. Her marriage had never been about love. Alaric Winford, Duke of Ashford, needed a wife of good name and proper blood. Elone, the daughter of a modest earl, had been suitable. The wedding had been grand and proper, held in London before rows of watching eyes. She had worn white silk and felt nothing but the weight of duty. He had spoken his vows in a calm voice that never warmed for her. She had answered as expected, and kept every promise since. She managed the household without complaint. She hosted when required. She moved through the manor with quiet grace, speaking little, asking for nothing. No child had ever come, and though no one said it aloud, the blame rested on her shoulders. The Duke showed no interest in changing their distance. Separate rooms became custom. Silence became law. Have you ever lived in a house so quiet that your own heartbeat felt like an intrusion? Have you ever shared a name with someone who felt more like a stranger than the servants who passed your door? A knock pulled her from her thoughts. Claribel entered, the housekeeper's niece, young and kind, with steady hands and a gentle presence that Elone trusted. She brought the post and news of Christmas plans. Lady Ma, the Duke's aunt, suggested fewer candles, fewer dishes, fewer signs of joy. Elone understood the meaning without it being said. Be smaller. Be quieter. Be grateful. Claribel hesitated before adding one more thing. Lord Theodric was coming for Christmas. The Duke's brother had been gone for years after a scandal. He was everything Alaric was not. Where Alaric was cold, Theodric was warm. Where Alaric held distance, Theodric reached out. His return would draw attention, and attention was dangerous in a house built on restraint. That evening, Elone returned to her room as she always did. A book lay open in her lap, unread. The fire burned low. Darkness pressed against the windows. She wondered, not for the first time, if her body even remembered what warmth felt like. Down another corridor, Alaric received the news of his brother's arrival. His jaw tightened. His hand gripped the pen too hard. Without knowing why, he rose and walked toward Elone's wing. He stopped outside her door. He did not knock. After a brief moment, he turned away. Some distances felt safer unbroken. Days passed and Christmas drew closer. The manor filled with pine scent and quiet order. Elone spent her hours in the library, surrounded by books that did not judge her silence. Claribel spoke to her of small things, of kitchen gossip, of preparations for Theodric's room. Once Elone asked if the Duke ever spoke of his brother. Claribel said only that they had been close once. Lady Ma arrived before Christmas, sharp as ever, wrapping criticism in concern. She commented on Elone's paleness, her quiet nature, her lack of cheer. Smile more, her words demanded without saying it. That night, Claribel brushed Elone's hair and spoke softly. The servants worried when the lady became too quiet. Quiet often meant something inside had broken. Elone said nothing, but her heart beat faster at the truth of it. Christmas Eve arrived with wind and carriage wheels on frozen ground. Guests filled the manor and warmth returned to the rooms in candlelight and conversation. Then Theodric arrived late and laughing, easy where others were stiff. He embraced his brother, spoke freely, smiled often. Elone watched from her chair, unseen as always. Later, Theodric found her and spoke to her kindly. Too kindly. He saw her in a way no one else had for years. His words unsettled her, not because they were improper, but because they were true. You deserve more than the silence, he said quietly where others could not hear. She looked away, unable to answer, afraid that if she spoke, everything she had buried would rise to the surface and drown her. That night, exhausted, Elone lay in her bed alone. The house settled into silence. Thoughts pressed in from all sides, and when sleep finally came, it brought truth with it. She dreamed of endless corridors and locked doors. She dreamed of calling out across distance. In her dream she spoke his name, not softly, not politely, but with all the longing she had never allowed herself to feel. Alaric. Down the hall, the Duke lay awake in the dark. Somewhere between sleep and waking, he heard it, her voice, his name, filled with sorrow and need. His heart began to race. For the first time in 7 years, Alaric Winford rose from his bed and walked toward his wife's door. Have you ever heard someone call your name and realized you had been waiting your whole life to answer? Have you ever known that crossing a hallway could change everything and still found the courage to move forward? Alaric stood in the doorway with the candle shaking slightly in his hand. The light fell across Elone's bed, across her pale face damp with tears, across the hand stretched into empty space beside her. She was still asleep, caught between dream and waking, her lips moving softly as if the words were being pulled from somewhere deep inside her. Alaric, she whispered again. The sound struck him harder than any accusation ever could. He had faced Parliament without fear. He had managed estates, debts, and men with steady control. Yet standing there, unseen, listening to his wife call his name in her sleep, he felt something inside him break open. He took a step forward, then another, careful not to wake her. This room, which he had avoided for 7 years, felt painfully intimate. Everything in it spoke of quiet endurance. The books by the bed, the neatly folded shawl on the chair, the single candle burned low, as if it too had learned to conserve hope. She stirred, her brows knitting as if the dream troubled her. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first. Then she saw him. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. She did not sit up. He did not speak. The moment balanced between reality and dream. You came, she said softly, her voice thick with sleep. He could not answer. Words failed him. He had built his life on restraint, on control, on never saying more than was required. Now all of that discipline deserted him. She blinked, confusion slowly giving way to awareness. Color touched her cheeks. She pulled the quilt higher, suddenly conscious of his presence, of the impropriety, of the distance that had always existed between them. "My lord," she said, attempting to sit. "Do not," he said quickly, and the urgency in his voice surprised them both. He steadied himself and spoke again, more quietly. "Please." She remained where she was, watching him with guarded eyes. The dream still lingered in her expression, hope mixed with fear, as if she expected him to vanish if she blinked. "I heard you," he said at last. Her breath caught. "Heard me? In your sleep," he continued. "You called my name." Silence stretched between them, not the practiced silence of years past, but something fragile and exposed. "I am sorry," she said, the words automatic, learned from years of apologizing for things that were never her fault. "No," he said firmly. "Do not be." He took another step into the room, then stopped as if unsure how close he was allowed to come. "I did not realize," he said slowly, each word costing him effort. "I told myself many things. That distance was respectful. That silence was safer. That I was sparing you from disappointment." Her hands clenched in the bedding. "You spared me nothing." The truth of it hung between them. "I see that now," he said. "I see what I have done." She looked away, tears slipping silently down her temples into her hair. "Seeing now does not give me back the years." "No," he said, "but it may give us what remains." She laughed once, quietly, without humor. "You speak as if this were a matter of accounts and estates." "I speak as a man who has been a coward," he replied. That word, spoken so plainly, made her look at him again. She searched his face, looking for mockery, for coldness, for distance. She found none. What she saw instead frightened her more. Vulnerability. "I do not know how to undo this," he said. "I only know that I cannot return to my chamber tonight and pretend I did not hear you. I cannot unknow what your silence has cost you." Her voice trembled. "And what of tomorrow? What of the eyes in this house? The rules we live by?" I have lived by rules all my life, he said. They have brought me nothing worth keeping if they require your loneliness. She said nothing. Hope was dangerous. She had learned that lesson too well. He moved closer to the bed, slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. She did not. He stopped close enough that she could see the tension in his jaw, the effort it took him simply to remain there. I do not ask you to forgive me, he said. I ask only that you allow me to try. She studied his face. This man who had been her husband in name only. This stranger whose distance had shaped her every day. Trying will hurt, she said. Yes, he replied, but so has not trying. Another silence followed, softer now. She nodded once, barely. That was all the permission he needed. He reached out, hesitated, then gently covered her hand with his own. She did not pull away. Her fingers were cold. I will not leave you alone again tonight, he said. Tears spilled freely now. She turned her face away, overwhelmed by the simple weight of his hand, by the warmth she had forgotten she missed. Stay, she whispered. He did. Do you believe that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is admit they were wrong? That healing begins not with grand gestures, but with the courage to remain present when it would be easier to leave? Morning came too quickly. Dawn light crept through the curtains, pale and uncertain. They had not slept much. They had spoken little. But something had shifted, fragile and real. When Alaric left her room at last, it was not with relief, but with resolve. The household noticed the change at once. Orders were given. Rooms were rearranged. Servants exchanged glances. Claribel watched with quiet hope. Lady Ma watched with sharp suspicion. Theodric watched with knowing eyes. By evening, whispers filled the corridors. At dinner, the Duke barely touched his food. His attention returned again and again to the woman seated across from him. Elone felt his gaze like warmth against her skin. It unsettled her, and yet she did not look away. Theodric rose with his glass, his voice calm but deliberate. His words cut through the room, like truth through silk. To new beginnings, he said, and everyone understood he was not speaking of the new year. When Alaric stood and asked for a private word with his wife, the room froze. Elone's heart pounded as she rose. This was no dream now. This was choice. He led her toward the chapel, candlelight spilling into the corridor. And for the first time in 7 years, she walked beside her husband, not behind him, not apart from him, but with him. And the house of Ashford held its breath once more, waiting to see what would be reborn in the light. The chapel doors closed behind them, muting the sounds of the dinner beyond. Candlelight flickered against stone walls worn smooth by centuries of prayer. The air smelled of wax and pine, and the quiet felt different from the silence that had ruled their marriage. This quiet waited. It listened. Alaric turned to her and, to her shock, lowered himself to his knees. Elone froze. No one had ever knelt for her. Not in duty, not in love. I will not pretend this is simple, he said, his voice steady but raw. I cannot undo the years I kept you alone. I cannot return what my pride took from you. But I can stand before you now without armor. Her hand shook. You are a duke, she whispered. You should not kneel. I am a man, he answered, and I failed the woman I vowed to honor. Tears slid down her cheeks unchecked. She had imagined this moment in 1,000 quiet ways, and none of them felt as real as this. I heard you call me, he continued, not as a title, not as a duty, but as a truth. I have spent years hiding behind silence, because I was afraid of wanting what I could lose. I see now that in avoiding loss, I created it. She swallowed hard. I learned not to hope, she said. Hope became dangerous. I know, he replied, and I will not ask you to give it freely, only to let it return slowly if it will. He reached for her hand, waiting. When she placed it in his, the contact felt almost sacred. There will be no more separate rooms, he said. No more doors between us. If you will allow it, I want a marriage that is lived, not endured. Her voice barely carried. And if I cannot become what you want, I do not want a performance, he said. I want you as you are. Something inside her finally gave way. She stepped closer, and he rose to meet her. Their first true kiss was gentle, uncertain, and full of 7 years of unshed grief. It tasted of salt and forgiveness, and something fragile but alive. Behind them, the candles burned steady. The change did not happen all at once. It unfolded. In the weeks that followed Christmas, Ashford Manor softened. Doors once kept closed stood open. Morning light found them sharing breakfast. Evenings ended not in separate wings, but in shared quiet. They learned each other in small ways. The sound of his laughter when unguarded. The way she touched books as if they were old friends. The way silence no longer hurt when filled with presence instead of absence. The servants noticed. So did the guests. Lady Ma returned to London with tight lips and packed trunks. Claribel smiled more freely. Theodric left in the spring, satisfied that something essential had been set right. By March, the snow retreated. Green pushed through frozen soil. In the shared chamber, the candle that once burned alone now rested beside two pillows. Elone stood at the window one morning, warmth at her back, his presence steady and real. She was no longer waiting. 7 years of distance had not ended them. They had taught them the cost of fear. And in learning that cost, they had finally found the courage to pay the price of love instead. Sometimes love does not arrive loudly. Sometimes it waits in silence until someone finally listens. And at Ashford Manor, two hearts learned that it is never too late to cross the distance if one dares to take the first step. Do you believe that marriage is more than a contract signed in youth? That real partnership begins when two people choose each other again, not out of obligation, but out of honest recognition. This story reminds us that the coldest winters can give way to the warmest springs, that separate rooms can become shared sanctuaries, and that a name cried out in a dream can wake a heart that has been sleeping for far too long. If this story moved you, subscribe to hear more tales of love found in unexpected places, of marriages reborn from ashes, of courage found not in grand gestures, but in the simple act of staying when leaving would have been easier. Share your thoughts if you believe it is never too late to choose love, even when years have passed and silence has become habit. Sometimes the greatest love stories are not about finding the right person, but about becoming the right person for the one you already chose.